recruitment, determination, and everything in between. Lots of you will have worked with us over the years. And it's a great arena for us to be in, and particularly during the COVID period, we're very proud to have helped lots and lots of businesses try and fathom some of the rules around COVID and the grants and loans and everything else related to running a business. So there's just some information about us here, which I'm just going to flick through. So we've got a very packed agenda today, and we're going to try and fly through. But if you want any information about our industry-specific guides all relating to HR and employment law, then you can look on our website, and you can download them from there or get in touch with us. So just really to start the session. So today's session is about neurodiversity in the workplace. And really, I just wanted to set the scene and explain why this was something that was really important to us and what we're going to cover today. We have got some personal perspectives. So we've got Miles, who has joined us. He's at Salesforce, and he's going to give us a really personal insight into how neurodiversity affects him and how he can share with us some good and bad tips from his experiences of working. Then we've got Suzanne, who's from Autism Plus. She's going to give us some information about what they do and the sorts of clients that she's worked with, and talk a little bit about access to work. So some really useful information. And then we've got Bradley, our recruitment director, who's going to just look at some recruitment tips all around neurodiversity. And then we've got Lindsay, our employment solicitor, and she's going to just talk about the legal implications for your business or organisation where you're employing people with spectrum disorders and who are neurodiverse. So first of all, really just to share with you my own personal perspective and the reason that I was really keen to put this session on. My son, who I'm sure won't mind me sharing a little bit of his story. So my son, was a very, very bright young lad. Everybody always commented on how bright he was growing up, and coming from a professional family, everyone always expected that he would, follow the normal path of doing A-levels, going to university and going into a professional job. And it became apparent, I think, from about 16 to 18, he had a pretty tough time trying to figure out perhaps why he thought differently about things. And I suppose it's fair to say that he crashed a little bit, thinking once he left education at 16, which was also unexpected, he said that he really didn't enjoy studying, and he found it quite difficult to focus and take information in. So between 16 and 18, he's done lots of different jobs. He worked for a bank, he worked in a call centre, he worked in a car showroom, all sorts of things. And then he got a job in the media, and just couldn't sort of focus enough to keep these jobs. And that's a fairly common pattern, which you'll see from when Miles talks to us about his experience. The reason I wanted to share that is because he then got a diagnosis of ADHD, and I think the difference that's made for him personally, for us as a family, and for me as an employer has been huge, because it's made me realise that actually once you know how you operate, once you get some help to deal with that, and if you're open with your employer about some of the challenges that you might have, but also some of the great things that you can do with the right environment, really simple changes can make a huge difference. And so, his career's really, really taken off post-diagnosis, and Millen is almost 21. But it was quite a difficult time. So for me, as I've understood a bit more about neurodiversity, I just really want to make sure that our clients are aware of the kinds of things that you should look out for, and the kinds of things you can put in place to create a really great culture to enable everybody in your workforce to thrive. And so I hope you found this useful. So I'm going to pass straight on to Miles Grayson, who's joined us, and he's going to talk about his story.
Cool. Hello everyone. I'm just wondering if I can control the screen. That's why we do it. Have I got it yet? There we go. I have the power. So yeah, so I'm here just to give you a little bit about my story and my journey with ADHD and how it came about and how I went for the diagnosis, and a little bit in terms of patterns as Jay introduced, sort of the some advantages and disadvantages, some good examples and bad examples of what's happened to me in my experience in the workplaces I've been into relating to that. So yeah, let's get started. So I've got to click. There we go. So a little bit about me. I was born in 1994 in Doncaster, so I make 27. I have to do a bit of maths there. So yeah, 27 years old, born in Doncaster. I'm an only child, so spoilt as you can imagine. I went to school in Doncaster and sixth form college in Scunthorpe, and I pretty much aced my GCSEs. So I sort of took a lot of sort of logical, analytical subjects, sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, maths, A stars, A's across the board. I was really bright, you know, a bit of an outdated term, but, you know, at the time considered sort of gifted and talented. Sixth form college, not so good. Biology, chemistry, again, the sort of physics. That's when it sort of flunked. Because as you can imagine, sixth form college, it's starting to put you in sort of that university mindset. So you'd start thinking, look, it's more about 40% teacher-led, about 60% self-taught. Obviously, in terms of the as you think of the typical symptoms, for example, you know, procrastination, trying to get to do those boring tasks, revision. That's when it starts to sort of go down a little bit. So I didn't go to university. I actually applied to do medicine at a number of universities, including Oxford. I was sort of brought up through school as the one that can, you know, the star pupil and everything like that. But because it just flunked for me, and you know, I got very quick rejections from these universities. And even then, I thought, on that train, I want to go to university. I need to go. I applied to do motorsport engineering instead because I've got a big interest in cars and F1 and racing and things like that. But then personally, I decided that I didn't want to waste the money on the social life. That's how I was going to go. I didn't feel like I was capable of going through that, all the self-study that's required during university. And it's been a huge amount of money, $9 grand a year, wasted on a social life when I know I'm not capable of doing it. I can't do university. So I decided not to go. I'm waiting for it. So instead, I went straight into work. I worked from when I was 17. So in terms of my history, so since not going to university, I'd started a mechanics apprenticeship. That lasted 2.5 days. And then so I ended up working part-time. So I was in a local shop. I'm trying to think, where's my... So I worked in a local village shop, assembling window blinds, in a hotel, in a bar, 3 of those at the same time. Then I started working full-time. Again, as an accounts assistant, as a car salesperson, and in a call center. And believe it or not, all of that was within 2 years. So 2 years of my life since finishing college, I did all of that. Are we spotting a pattern? You know, similar to what Jay said, you know, you don't really know what you want to do, lots of dark jobs. So since then, I found my job as a Salesforce administrator, and I absolutely love it. And I've been doing that for 5 years, and I'm now a Salesforce consultant at a consultancy, which is really good, based in Nottingham, called Ogen. I absolutely love them. So I've been doing that for 5 years. And before that's what all those jobs were in 2 years. So what the F happened? What happened there? Well, in January 2018, I was diagnosed with combined type ADHD. So a little bit in terms of what it is. Most commonly perceived are things like being rowdy, disruptive, being rude or ignorant, badly behaved, not that bright. And as a result, add it all up, people with ADHD are generally unsuccessful. but they're vastly misunderstood. All of those is how we see it. Are we really that bad? People like Simone Biles, Dave Grohl, Justin Timberlake, Emma Watson, Richard Branson, a few other people like will.i.am, Ryan Gosling, Michael Phelps, another Olympian. Even Albert Einstein was strongly believed to have ADHD. And all these people on the screen have all come forward and publicly confirmed the diagnosis. It's a case of all these people incredibly successful. And what do they have in common? Even though they're across a whole range of different areas, from acting, Olympics, business, they're all incredibly passionate, and they've all been in areas where they can fulfill that passion, and they've had the platform to be able to do that and do what they want to do to be successful. So when going back to it, people think these ADHDs are all these negative things that we see from society, or fidgeting, excessive talking. I love to talk. This is why I like doing things like this, because it's a case of I can be the motor mouth I want to be. Being restless activity, we can't plan very well. We're always late to things. We're always forgetful when people are asking us to do things. But what is it exactly? Now, when I went for my diagnosis, one thing I found is, I say, I'm coming from sort of a bit of a sciencey background. Generally, we all want to say, if anyone has any kids or knows any kids, or they're stuck to that video game all day, or if you're on a mobile game on your phone, it's like just one more game, or when you're watching an episode of your TV show on Netflix, just one more episode. It's that dopamine hit. It's like a drug in your brain. It's that hormone. And ADHD has been identified as those with a lack of dopamine. Your brain can't produce it as much. So it's very much an interest-based nervous system. So we do things that interest us to give us that dopamine hit. So things like video games, playing mobile games, things like that quick rush. That's what we all want in life. That's what our brain wants. So it's using that. So it's being able to put that into the places where we can flourish. So what the benefits? Hyperfocus, or some people dub the term hyperfixation. So it's the things like, if you find something that you're incredibly passionate about, like for me, I like to play video games. Or if I end up, even at work, if I just end up finding the task which I really enjoy doing, like I do all the time because I've managed to find that, it can be midday. I could start on a project at midday, and that'd be it until midnight, 12 hours straight, just bang, bang, bang. I'm really focused on it because I absolutely love what I do. The output is incredible, as you can imagine, if someone's focusing on that sort of work. We're very analytical, very logical. We like to look at situations, problem solve. We like to bring things to a solution. Because of that, we're very curious. We like to ask questions. And because we like to be curious and ask questions, we like to think out the box. The worst thing someone can say to me is, I say, why do we do it that way? Why are we doing it like this? If someone turns around to me and say, well, that's because of how we've always done it, that's we don't like that. We like to think, well, this is better. Let's do this. So it's the imagination that you get there. I'm very empathetic, sympathetic. Part of ADHD is that regulation of emotion, so we can understand, we can put ourselves in situations which other people might struggle with. And adding all that up, we're very passionate about what you do. If, as someone with ADHD, because I found my calling within Salesforce and all the sort of the IT side behind it, I'm incredibly passionate about it. I love it, and I'm very passionate about the things I do outside of work as well. So again, so in terms of how that can relate into the positives of the workplace, going from the whole, we don't plan well, we have poor timing, have a great interest in problem solving. We're very passionate about what we want to do, and that's why we come forward with all these analytical problem solving, creative things. What if we do this? What if we do that? Because we're passionate about wanting to do the best that we can in the situation that we're in. So, in case of what can you do in the workplace to help us achieve that, and then as a result, your business achieve that as well. I know Suzanne's going to be going into a lot of deeper ways of exactly how, but broadly speaking, it's a case of just listening, speak to us, have us involved, and I'll go through a few examples in terms of how that worked in the past for me. Observe, instead of jumping to conclusions, look what's happening, step back, look at the bigger picture. It's just a case of taking that extra little bit of time to look at the situation before snapping to a decision. And the result, it's a case of providing that support, providing that openness. It's not necessarily just providing things to help us do better, but it's having that opportunity and putting across that impression to be open and willing to listen. So what happens if we don't provide and we don't listen and don't observe? Well, there's been a few things in the past that's been bad. So for example, just before I went through my diagnosis, when I first started in my first Salesforce role, I was actually very close to being put on performance review. I was a bit like, why? Because it was a case of, why am I looking for a career change? Why am I not doing very well? You know, it was a case of, I love this job that I'm in. I really like doing it. So why am I thinking about changing? And why am I just suddenly poor performing? And that's what made me get my diagnosis. And I was very nearly put on performance review, because when I first started the role, I was promised to be sent on on-site training. And I was very eager, because obviously going on site, teacher-led training, certifications from it. And it was very much it's quite expensive. Can you give the training videos a go? And there's only so much you can do when you're listening to a computer generated voice roll off a script and watch a video. I wasn't learning anything, and I didn't like it like that. So it's a case of, many times I was saying, I'm struggling with this training, I'm struggling with these training videos. Is there any alternatives I could look at? And all I got was, just give it another go, just give it another go. And it just wasn't working. So as a result, that was it. So then I'm getting the diagnosis, and they suddenly turn around and go, oh, okay, then let's have a look at some other things. This was a little bit late for that. Another good example is my very nice, badly drawn. I took the side art. This is a seating for roles. As you can see down, you have a couple of CEO officers with a room. This here is also a case up to that was the area to the kitchen.
Hi, Miles. Sorry, it's
Call
Lindsay.
centers, the sales departments.
Sorry
Now,
to
every
interrupt
CEO
you,
was, I'll go up to the
Miles.
meeting rooms, or go up to the boardroom. Everyone who's going out to loo would right in the entrance. So all day, people were walking through the door. That's all I could hear, chatting, nattering. If anyone needed, maybe could be focused on something, and then suddenly tap on the back, Miles, I need your help. Except my audio is breaking up, so if it's
yeah, sorry, Miles, it was me interrupting you there. Yeah, it just keeps breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, it was trying to think. Yeah, it was the worst possible spot in that whole office for me to be sitting. So it's that case of, look, this isn't right. We were going through a whole office remove, and I was very adamant to be included in that discussion to say, look, I need to be sat somewhere much better. In the end, I ended up sitting up at the top next to the CEO office. Everyone, I could see everyone come in. They involved me in that discussion, and as a result, it was an interview I had after this role. It was the first interview that I had after being diagnosed with ADHD. I was currently mapping how I was going to behave. Obviously, the worst thing we can do is we can chat. Is it?
Hi, Miles. Sorry, your audio's got really terrible. Yeah, we can't really hear you properly. I think the only thing I can suggest is, if you've got any other devices that are already connected to the internet, you can unconnect them, and then that might make your connection stronger. That may help, because we could hear you perfectly fine at the beginning, so it's only just started to break up.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. We're going to see if we can get Miles back, because I know, everything we're saying, it's riveting to listen to. So we really want to get him back on.
Linz, I wonder if we should move on to Suzanne, because Miles was on his last slide, and then maybe we can come back to him. Because we can't hear anything at all now.
Yeah, okay then. So
thanks, Miles. He was actually on the last slide, and it's really interesting, that diagram. Of course, we ran the session live yesterday. Hate technology.
I can't hear you, though.
Are you...
Hello?
Oh, hi, Miles. I think you're on.
Okay, I can't hear anyone else. That's the problem. This is good, isn't it? Let me try and change my speakers. Is that better?
Yeah, that's great. So do you want to finish that last slide? And that would be brilliant.
Can I hear you?
No, I think we're still struggling.
He's dropped off now, so let's move on to the next ones.
Yeah, so Suzanne, I think we'll move on, and then we can catch up with Miles. But you know, if anyone's got any questions for Miles or anything you've heard so far or any comments, then please do put them on the chat, and we can have a good discussion about that at the end.
He'll be trying to get himself back on. Hi everyone, so my name's Suzanne. I'm head of employment at Autism Plus, and I've been specialising in autism and employment for 20 years now. I've been at Autism Plus for 15 years in January, so it's my kind of line of work and my specialism. I think Miles is back on the screen, but I think we're going to try and come back to you, Miles. I don't know if you heard that before you dropped off, so I'm going to try and come back to you afterwards. Okay, so in terms of what I'm covering today, we're going to talk about neurodiversity, a little bit of introduction to the autistic spectrum, the impact of COVID-19, support strategies, and introduction to access to work. So before I start, I'm going to get you doing a little bit of talking in the chat. So can people just put in the chat what they think the term neurodiversity means to you? There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just keen to kind of know what your current understanding in neurodiversity is. Just keep an eye on the chat for anything that's coming through. Any keywords, anything that you associate with it? Emily's put a comment there about her own experience as well. Autistic. Adaptation. Yeah. Different challenges, thinking differently. Some good kind of comments coming through there, so thank you for that. By all means, keep putting them on there, and I'll keep an eye on what's coming through there as well. I wanted to dispel the kind of term neurodiversity a little bit, and I've talked to Jay about this, because one of my things around neurodiversity is it's such a buzzword at the minute, in that employers kind of looking at neurodiversity as almost going back to Rain Man syndrome, of people that are very highly talented, people that are exceptionally skilled, people that are special talents. However, neurodiversity is also a spectrum condition, and neurodiversity covers lots of different things and isn't just about those that are highly talented. It's about everyone being different and lots of kind of diversity across that. So what neurodiversity is, it's the difference in brain activity that affects social, mood, emotional learning and mental functioning, and refers to a range of neurological conditions, including dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, ADD, autism and Asperger's syndrome. And I'm going to talk about some of them as we go through. What it isn't is it's not just another word for autism or autistic. It covers lots and lots of different conditions. And what you might find is that some people who are neurodiverse will call people who aren't neurodiverse neurotypicals, because we have a typical neurology of the brain. So if you ever heard the term neurotypical, it probably refers to you if you're not on the spectrum. So here's some associated conditions that I wanted to touch on. And I call them associated conditions because they're not necessarily neurological conditions, but they're conditions that are very closely linked to it. So you've got right up at the top kind of motor coordination difficulties and dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is a coordination difficulty. However, with dyspraxia, there is also the difficulty planning, difficulty prioritizing, difficulty putting things in order. So it's not just about motor clumsiness, it can be about kind of difficulty putting things in order in your mind as well. Then you've got dyscalculia and dyslexia. Dyscalculia, for those who aren't familiar, is the maths version of dyslexia. So it's people who might get numbers mixed up and struggle with kind of maths and putting decimal place in the wrong place, things like that, which I think somebody's talking about later on. Attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Obviously Miles, hopefully we'll get back to Miles, because Miles talks amazingly about his own ADHD and how it's affected him. And then depression and anxiety as well. So in terms of depression and anxiety, they're associated, because a lot of people that are with neurodiversity often have these as secondary conditions that affect their ability to process information, but also it affects their ability to kind of deliver day-to-day life. So they might see other people achieving things and want to achieve those and not understand why they can't. So find that really hard to deal with. Obsessive compulsive disorder. For those I'm a Celebrity fans out there, this has been in the press this week. So Arlene said, oh, I'm OCD about cleaning. And it's caused a bit of upset with people who actually have OCD, because OCD is a very intense condition that affects people's ability to go by day-to-day routines, that it can be really deliberating in terms of their ability to function on a day-to-day basis, because they have to do things in a certain order. And if things are out of order, it can affect their ability to get out of the house in the morning. It's not just a case of being overly clean or overly tidy, it's much more intense than that. And then you've got Tourette syndrome. So Tourette syndrome is a condition that we see on telly of people having verbal tics, people randomly saying words. That's not all what Tourette's is about. Tourette's is about kind of physical tics as well. So I had a job centre advisor turn around and say to me, oh, this guy I'm referring across to you, he has Tourette's, but it doesn't sound like he does. So he was almost questioning this guy's Tourette syndrome. And I said, well, actually, it can just be a physical tic as well. It can be a twitching of the neck. It doesn't have to be something that you will hear. And the job centre advisor was quite surprised by that, because what TV portrays Tourette's as is something that is very verbal. Pathological demand avoidance. I said yesterday at their talk that I could talk about this all day. It's a very complex part of the autistic spectrum. It's very closely linked to the autistic spectrum, but it kind of is what it says on the tin, that it's a severe avoidance to demand. So people with PDA will, if you ask them to do something and ask them politely, chances are they'll be more willing to do that. But if you place a demand on someone, this must be done now, that automatically triggers an avoidance response in them, where they'll kind of ask questions like, why am I doing that? Why do you want me to do that? And also wanting to know the specifics of that, but then kind of following that up with I'm not going to do that because it's a demand and you putting it on me. But it's not something that they're doing because they're arrogant, because they're rude. It's something that is actually part of their disability. And sensory integration disorder, which I'll talk about sensory challenges shortly as well. I wanted to cover more some of kind of the key traits of people that are on neurodiverse conditions, but also more specifically autism as well, because autism is a big part of this. And autism is the one that most people tend to know about. But one of the key challenges is social interaction, understanding ambiguous communication. So we all kind of do things like this, kind of go, oh, okay, just put it over there. Well, what do you mean by put it over there? Put it where, when, how, now? And there's lots of questions that come with that. Understanding emotions is challenging. So we cry when we're happy, we cry when we're sad, we cry when we're angry. So how do we determine that person's emotion? How do we know what them tears mean in that situation? We just intuitively know. We read the situation, we pick up on non-verbal cues, and we make sense of what's happening. That's not always easy for someone who's neurodiverse. Meeting new people is challenging. So the awkwardness of walking into a room and knowing who to look at first, who to talk to first, we all feel that. But for someone who's neurodiverse, there's also taking in the sensory aspects of the environment, how long you might look at someone. Do people shake hands? Do they not shake hands? What do I say? What's appropriate conversation? Do I start the conversation? There's lots of kind of things that somebody will be concerned about and worried about. Starting and ending conversations. And this is where I get you all thinking about your last conversation you had with someone. How do you know that conversation finished? Was there an obvious, okay, the conversation's finished now, let's go on? Did you have that at the end of the sentence, or did you just stop talking? And how did you know by one person stopping talking that was the end of the conversation? How did you intuitively know that? So when you're working with someone who's neurodiverse, someone who's autistic, and they continue that conversation on and on and on, it's because they don't know how to end that conversation probably. So it's okay to kind of say to them and say, okay, we're going to get on with our job now, because otherwise how are they going to learn these cues? Because they're not picking up on non-verbal cues that somebody else might. New and intimidating situations can be difficult. So like I said, we all experience this. And I said yesterday, walking into a room of people when nobody's been in a room with people for over a year, walking into a room, delivering a training session, it's that awkwardness of, is somebody sat there? Do I sit at that seat? Do I get a drink first? Do I sit down first? What do I do in that situation? And local communication challenges. I mean, if you go from Leeds to Kirklees, a word can mean something very different if you're from West Yorkshire. There's very different kind of regional communication differences. And I've got a colleague in my team who has just moved back from America. And I said to him the other day, I'm a Yorkshire girl. And I said, oh, this guy was really wickling. And he kind of looked at me and he went, I don't know what he's talking about. What do you mean wickling? And we kind of carried on the conversation later on the day on a WhatsApp conversation. And he sent me the picture of someone kind of carving wood. He went, I don't understand. Wickling is carving wood. That's what Google says. And I was like, no, actually, wickling means worrying. And he's like, does it? Where's that come from? I guess it's a Yorkshire phrase. But he was really confused by that conversation because not understanding what I meant by that word meant he'd not picked up on the context of the conversation at all. But he was able to ask me what that meant and able to question that. But someone who's neurodiverse might not necessarily be able to question that. So they might be really confused by the wording that you're using. Literal communication. How many times do we all say, I'll be with you in a minute, take a seat? How many times do we use phrases like that? There's so many things that can be misinterpreted from that as well, in terms of just picking up on words and understanding what we actually mean. Do we actually mean 60 seconds when we say I'll be with you in a minute, or do we mean I'll come to you when I'm finished? So just think about your wording and don't be surprised if somebody's confused or upset if you use something literal and don't actually mean that. And humour and context. So humour's ambiguous communication. It's complex to understand, and there's always a context to humour where a joke's appropriate or not appropriate. One guy I was supporting at the Home Office, I walked in with black security alerts everywhere, and he turned around to me and said, he turned around to the security guard and said, watch her, she's got a bomb on her. And I must have gone white and curled up into a little ball in that 1 second. The security guard went, oh, come on, get on with it. And I thought, I'm so glad you know him. I'm so glad you know this guy. But if it had been a different security guard or an airport, the situation would have ended very differently. But he thought it was funny because the security guard laughed. Therefore, it was funny because somebody laughed at him. And it's that kind of humour and context that can actually cause offence sometimes. If a joke's said in the wrong time or the wrong place, then it can actually cause a lot of challenges. Hidden communication languages, so body language, facial expressions, eye contact. I mean, did anyone ever teach you how long it is to look at someone before it becomes uncomfortable? Or did you teach you when you were younger say to you, if I'm talking, look at me when I'm talking, because that tells me that you're listening, because therefore that person will look and talk and listen and all at the same time. Or they might be looking out the window and not paying attention, but it's because looking and listening at the same time is two senses that you're asking them to do, and is challenging. So is eye contact really that much of a big deal in an interview? Does it matter if they're not looking at you, if they're giving you the right answers? Do we really need to take that on part of the communication and take that on board as part of the scoring? Proximity. We get on a bus and we gap fill. We sit at the bottom left and then the next person sits at the top right, and we gap fill during that getting on the bus. We only sit next to someone when there's no more seats on the bus. However, the autistic person might get on and sit next to the one person that's on the bus because they like that seat and it's near the bell and they can see the driver. What they're not thinking about is the impact on you. It's not that they don't care, it's not that it's not important to them, it's that they're sitting where they want to sit, and it comes across as rude, and then we move up and we get uncomfortable and they go, great, more space, because they're not reading the non-verbal cues, they're not thinking about the impact on you. And like I said, it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't always understand the social nuances that we all just get, we all just intuitively understand. And here's some kind of common barriers in the workplace. So ambiguous rules not being followed. If there's a rule or a guidance that needs to be followed and somebody doesn't follow it, don't be surprised that that person's going to go to management and complain about them, because they've broken a rule. They're not following the rule. There's a rule that should be followed. But we all know that with rules and procedure in a workplace, you tweak it and you adapt it. And there are sometimes white lines and faded lines in policies and procedures. but not for someone who's autistic necessarily. It needs to be followed to the T, so they need to understand why it's not being followed. Finding team meetings difficult and training difficult because there's lots of social things to deal with in those situations. Difficulty knowing what to do in unstructured times. So we had one guy that we were supporting who worked at a COVID testing centre, and his response to, he was told by his management, we can have an hour in the canteen at lunch. And then he disappeared for an hour and a half at lunch and got called into the office for taking too long. And he said, well, I don't understand what the problem is. I went to get my lunch from the shop and then I had an hour in the canteen because you told me I could have an hour in the canteen. They didn't tell him that he needed to collect his lunch during that time as well. So he got his lunch and then he had an hour in the canteen. So he kind of followed what they'd said literally, but didn't really understand that kind of social nuances around that again. Understanding unsocial rules around making drinks. So I think more so COVID, we're all a bit kind of, do we make people drinks? Do we not make drinks? And I had a little bit of a joke about this yesterday in the face-to-face session, because some people like the milk in the tea first, some people don't. But for someone who's neurodiverse, making a drink for someone can be very stressful because they want to get it right. But there's so many different ways to make a drink for someone that there's so many chances for it to go wrong. So actually just asking someone to make a drink can be challenging. So ask them, are you comfortable with this? Are you okay with this? Don't expect them to just be okay and be comfortable doing that, because they might actually be quite anxious about picking that up. Might need longer to process new information, lots of things taken at once, might need time to digest that. Difficulty engaging in staff social events. We're very close to Christmas. One guy that I was supporting wanted to go to the Christmas event, but had so many questions that he wanted to ask that he said to me, I'm just not going to go because I've got so many questions, but if I ask all these questions and then still don't go, that's rude. So I'm not going to ask the questions in the first place. And the things he wanted to know was, do people wear jeans? Who sits where? Do I order a drink at the bar or do we sit down? How early do people get there? How do people get home? What time do people stay till? He needed to plan what he was going to do, but he had so many questions that he just felt silly asking all the questions. So I asked them for them, and he went to the event and he absolutely loved it because he had no questions left, he had no fears left. Feeling isolated from the team because they might not be able to fit in with some of the conversations that are going off around relationships and partners and things that everyone else kind of just takes for granted. Not all neurodiverse people have been able to achieve that. Some of the other kind of workplace barriers is wanting to be impressed and be liked and having high expectations of self. So wanting to fit in and wanting to set that bar high. So may have experienced lots of bad experience and lots of failures in the past where they want to come into your workplace and be amazing at their job and be 150% and really want you to like them and want this to go well, but actually might burn out very quickly and become overloaded because they're trying so hard to prove themselves. And they often feel like they need to prove themselves a lot more than someone else does. So it's a case of kind of, as a manager, saying to them, it's okay, giving them regular feedback, letting them know what's going well so that they don't feel like they need to kind of burn out. Environmental barriers. So if we were in a face-to-face room, I'd be pointing out things like air conditioning that you've all filtered out of your brains and that you can't hear. But I'm sure in every one of your rooms that you're in now, there's some background noise that you're currently ignoring. And now you can hear it because I've pointed it out to you again. But for someone who's neurodiverse, they can't necessarily filter out all those background noises and background lights and other things that are going off and people walking past the windows. So might actually struggle and be sensory overloaded in an environment. Colleagues may not have an understanding of the condition. Some of the wording's dropped off the bottom of there, so apologies, I need to sort that out for next time. So colleagues may not have an understanding of the condition and may not be kind of at the point where they want to understand as well. If someone's been in a workplace for 20 years and then suddenly gets a diagnosis, it's hard for colleagues to understand why now. And believe it or not, I have been in a workplace where I've delivered training to a bunch of colleagues and somebody's turned around to me and said, his mum should have taught him manners by now. That still exists, that attitude still exists towards autism and neurodiversity, unfortunately. But there are people that are just they've got no tolerance for people. So there may be challenges around that as well. So we need to be aware of that and we need to manage that appropriately without highlighting the person's difficulties more so. Hot desking, I know Miles talks about this a little bit. It's the bit it was on with screen, so hopefully Miles can come back to that as well. But the hot desking is challenging because who likes anyone touching their pen anymore? Who likes people moving their things around? And hot desking is stressful and challenging for the most of us. But for someone who's neurodiverse, who likes things in a certain way or likes things in a certain order, hot desking can be very stressful. And then we look at kind of things like flexibility of thoughts, the routines and structure, changes to environment, changes to boundaries. So your colleague suddenly becomes your manager. How do you know how to change and work differently with them? How do you know how to respond to them differently? And an example in terms of that, I'm sure you've all seen adverts that you see pop up on places where these adverts of job interviews, and people go to a job interview and on the way there they have a run-in with someone in a car and have a swearing match, or something happens on the car, and they get to the job interview and it's the guy interviewing them they've just had the run-in with. How do you change that relationship in a different scenario? How we respond to people in different situations is very different. But for someone who's autistic, that's very hard to change that relationship. It's very hard to respond differently in different ways and suddenly switch up your communication. And then sensory challenges. So someone can be hyper or hypo. Hypo is undersensitive, hyper is oversensitive to sounds or lights. So again, I kind of feel like I'm jumping on some of Miles' stuff, but obviously from yesterday, I know some of the things that Miles touched on. That one of the things Miles pointed out is that he couldn't always hear someone coming behind him when he was focused on a task, because he doesn't tune into some of those things all the time. Sight, sound, smells can be over intense, or actually they might not smell danger, they might not smell smoke, they might not pick up on things that they probably should do if there's a danger or a hazard. Might take longer to familiarise with new environments and adapt to the sensory environment as well. Difficulty focusing attention if there's glass rooms with glass windows, because that's the modern thing now, to have glass windows so everyone can see everyone and we're all working together. But actually that can be very distracting for somebody who's neurodiverse, to have someone walking past all the time. So touching on COVID, what changes have happened post-COVID that you have struggled with? I don't know if anyone wants to be putting things in the chat while I'm talking about COVID as well, but what have you struggled with as part of COVID, and changes that have occurred as a result of COVID that are really stressing you out at the moment? Please just keep putting them in the chat if you're able to. Some of the things that the people we support have put on there is around fears for neurodiverse individuals, things like changes to the journey or seats not being available on the bus. Things going different ways and suddenly sitting on a certain seat and then that seat not being available anymore is really stressful. That's a change. Changes to policies and practices, changes to the way that things happen. Government policies sometimes are conflicting with company policies. Government's saying you don't need social distance anymore, but whereas some companies are saying you do, therefore which rule do I follow? Environments have changed. We've suddenly got perspex barriers up around reception. How do we manage that? How do we navigate these new environmental changes? Used to being at home, so things are quieter at home, and we're now dealing with all the sensory overload of coming back to work. Changes to layouts, the desks are moving around, people are moving around, equipment's being moved, because we've cleared and tidied and we've made things more accessible to COVID, but actually that's caused a bit of a stress. Yes, so mass depersonalised interactions, thank you Alison for putting that in the chat. A lot of questions around vaccines, fear of reinforced, but also not comfortable with masks. Yeah, absolutely. But if you think about these stressors in terms of that, it's hard for somebody who's not neurodiverse, but actually put tenfold anxiety on that, and that's really stressful for somebody. I mentioned PP there on this one around reading social cues as well. So we can't pick on those social nuances as well, and more so social non-verbal things, because it's behind a mask. But also we've met someone online and suddenly meeting them in person, and that's a different perspective. That's different from being online. Communication's different. And we said that as we were setting up the chat, that if we'd have been in the room yesterday, everyone was kind of chatting as we were waiting to start, whereas we're in the call today and it kind of goes quiet because it's whose turn is it to talk. So in regards to COVID, it's been conscious changes to process and practices. Has your entrance to the building changed? Preparing for changes to buildings, give warnings of changes to routines. So if you're changing your working hours or doing staggered starts, then consult with that person. Don't exclude or make assumptions that person's comfortable with that. Ask them, really include them and ask them, because most of them will want to be asked. We've got a couple more comments there. So working remotely from home, you don't get the reassurance, harder to pick up on cues that you're doing a good job or bad job. Absolutely. And I think this is the thing, that we assume that people will come forward if they've got a problem, whereas someone who's neurodiverse won't necessarily approach you if they've got a problem or they're struggling and they're working at home. They'll wait for you to contact them. So they might actually be at home and really, really stressed over something and not be able to just turn around and ask a question. They'll worry about interrupting people. They'll worry about who do they contact. Make sure they know what to do if they need that support as well. There's some statistics here for you. So currently there's only 22% of autistic people employed compared to 54% of all disabled people, which is quite disappointing, because there's some autistic people with some amazing skills and amazing ability and really can bring a lot of value to the workplace, but compared to all disabled people, that's a very low number. However, pre-COVID, it was 16%. Something's changed during COVID in that the world's become a little bit more autistic friendly. There's more working at home jobs, there's more ability to access things than they were before. And we're not expecting people to socialise as much as they did pre-COVID. So that's something that's become easier. Around 1 in 57 children in the UK is on the autistic spectrum. It used to be 1 in 100 in adults, so something's changing again. And it's not necessarily around more people being diagnosed, it's around more people being recognised, because it's more talked about. 60% of adults with childhood ADHD will continue to show symptoms in their adult life. It doesn't go away. It's not going to disappear when someone becomes an adult. The condition is still there. Boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism than girls. No real knowledge as to why this is. One of my theories is that as a girl, you socialise more, you get involved more, your parents take you to friends' houses to play more, whereas as a boy, it's more socially acceptable to play on the PlayStation. So therefore, girls mask and hide. The girls mask and hide the condition easier than boys do. In regards to the stat, yeah, that's diagnosed autism. So it's people that obviously come forward, and obviously it will only be in a selection of people as well that stat's related to. So the stats in reality might be higher, but also in terms of diagnosed as well, there are so many people that are undiagnosed in the workplace as well. The NHS only accepted ADHD as a condition in 2009. So obviously that's challenging, because a lot of people would have been diagnosed or misdiagnosed with something different prior to that. 2 in 5 autistic people are diagnosed with anxiety disorder. Many more will have experience of anxieties throughout their life. And 1 in 10 people in the UK have some degree of dyslexia. So you look at some of these stats and you start thinking about your workplace and how many people you have employed in your workplace, and you start going, actually, we're going to have a lot of neurodiverse people in our workplace probably that we don't know about. So the more you go back from today and talk about neurodiversity, the more people are going to come forward and approach you for some support. Just covering on some support strategies kind of as a summary. Things to remember is understanding social rules, make clear what's expected of them. Don't assume they'll learn from other people. Talk to them, communicate with them, make sure they understand what you're wanting from them. Literal communication can be challenging, so support with that. Link into support agencies. So if you have support packages and health packages and counselling for staff, make sure they know how to access that. Don't assume they're going to go on your staff intranet and access that themselves. They'll need to know that that's accessible to them and what to do if they need it. Ensure they know what's expected of them and when and where. Don't make promises you can't keep. So if you don't say, okay, well, I'm going to get that thing sorted for you tomorrow, and it turns out to be Thursday or Friday or the week after, don't be surprised if that person becomes stressed, because you've given them a time and they will hold that and then get anxious if that doesn't happen. Break down instructions, clarify understanding. Learning new tasks can take longer because they're trying to absorb everything to do with that. And multitasking can be difficult. So if you're asking someone to fill in a form, don't then go, so how was your journey? How was your morning? What have you been up to recently? If you're asking them to do 2 things at once, you don't have to fill that silence. It's not necessary to fill that silence. Just think about the impact on the person that's trying to concentrate on filling out a form. And just to finally finish off, talk about access to work. For those that don't know, Access to Work is a government scheme and is funding for people who are in the workplace. It's what they call government's best kept secret, because not everyone knows about it. And when you do, you think it's about ramps and equipment. Access to Work can fund support workers. So one of the things we provide is in-work support and training awareness that is all fully funded through Access to Work, where we can provide support workers on a weekly basis, pre-COVID, South Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, post-COVID across the whole of the UK, remotely or face-to-face. And that's supporting people to have someone to offload to and have someone to talk to that understands their condition. And my contact details are on the back of there as well. I'm more than open to questions. I don't know if we've got time for questions at this point, Jay, or if people want to ask questions later or in the chat, and I can answer things in the chat as we go on to the next talker.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Suzanne. You're obviously much better at multitasking than most of us, because you were actually reading the chat while you were talking. I don't know how you do that. But yes, so I think most of it you answered. I couldn't see any specific questions, but we will, Ellie, my colleague Ellie's keeping an eye on them, and any specific questions we'll come back to at the end.
Okay,
but that was brilliant, you know, and I'm sure lots of people listening to you and Miles will have things sort of resonate with them, either about themselves, their colleagues, you know, family and friends. So it's brilliant. So Miles, we're going to try and go back to Miles, because I love that last diagram that he was on. Some really simple things, you know, about our workplace environment that we can change to make things easier. So Miles, if you're sorted with your connectivity, then let's give it another go.
Yeah, I'm guessing you can all hear me now.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, great stuff. I think that's the benefits of being your own IT guy. Sometimes it's you can get things sorted pretty quickly. Yeah. Yeah. So as I was saying, I'll start this slide again. Sort of looking at good and bad examples in the workplace personally that I've had in my life, and I know now that you've listened to Suzanne, you'll probably be able to relate a lot of these to that. So as I said, here's my very poorly drawn diagram. Obviously, this is why I took the sciences and not like art when I was at school. It shows. Which shows an office plan, the layout plan of one of my old roles. Now, at the top, as you can see, there's a couple of CEO offices. There's a meeting room in the middle. The circle in the center is the spiral staircase up to the main boardroom there as well. And then obviously the bottom, there's the door, which leads to things like the kitchen, the sales department, the call center department, and everything like that. So as you can imagine, people go into the kitchen all the time for cups of tea, cups of coffee, going to lunches, going to the loo. People who are off in the sales and departments, call centers are all coming up to see the CEOs, go to the meeting rooms and everything. As you can imagine, there's one place that's absolutely poor for me to sit, and you guessed it, a seat right next to the door. And as well as Suzanne said, in terms of people coming up to me, you know, I could never hear people coming up to me. You know, a lot of the time I'd get, because I'm so focused on trying to zone out all the noise, or I'm so focused on something, I get a Miles. And I'm like, what? Yeah, hello. You know, and so I've been trying to get hold of you, which wasn't great, you know. And so when there was a big office move, I was very adamant that I was involved in the process in terms of, you know, since my diagnosis. And as a result, I was involved in that process. I was sort of consolidated and considered in terms of the new scene plan. And then I ended up sitting right at the top next to the CEO's office. My back to the wall, I could see everyone, see who was approaching. Again, no one was like walking past me all the time. It was a much better, much more relaxed environment. I could finally focus on my work. And that ended up being quite good as well. I think another thing I mentioned in terms of the training as well. When I first started Salesforce, I was promised teacher-led training to go away on the Salesforce courses and learn that way. I was thinking, great, it's not like university, it's like being back at school. I'll have people that can teach you, I'll be able to listen. And there was a case of, it's quite expensive to go there, can you give the training videos a go? And as I was looking through the training videos, there's only so much that you can pay attention when it's a computer generated robotic voice droning a script at you. I couldn't concentrate at all, no matter how many times I said, it's not working, I can't concentrate. All I got was again, just try it, book yourself a meet. And like I said, I looked at it, and again, everything was great because they managed to realize that I learned differently from everyone else. Another really bad experience I know that I had was actually the first interview that I had since getting my diagnosis, when I was looking for a new role. I was looking to grow, I was growing into my new role. got this interview, great stuff. Spoke to the internal recruiter saying, I've just been diagnosed with ADHD. I'm really nervous about it. I don't want it to sort of hurt my hopes in any way. I said, no worries, pop it on the application form. Obviously, the interviewers will be reading that. They'll be able to see that. Because I was conscious about going off on tangents, you know, speaking a lot. These open-ended questions that you get, I wanted to make sure it was relevant. You know, it was the first time I had a job interview about something I was growing in. You know, it was very, very big for me. Just starting medication. So I arrived on there, sat in reception, people walking about all over the place, couldn't really settle, didn't know what was going to happen. Called into the meeting room, sat down. First question, Miles, tell us about yourself. And I was a bit like, so guess what? I told them about myself. They got my full life story because that's what they asked me. I was very much, you know, going into my passions, what I like to do outside work and everything. We ended up going back on track in the end, having relevance. The meeting actually overran a little bit, so we moved down to a breakout area just to finish off. And then when I got my feedback, I didn't get the role. They said, we actually think that you were the most technical, you know, more ideal candidate, but because of your interview performance and you went off on huge tangents, I mean, we'll have plenty of time to get to know you when you start the role. So just a bit concerned about that. So unfortunately, the job went to someone else. And obviously, I was distraught. I'm thinking, I did everything I could. I mentioned at the very start of the interview process, saying, you know, this is something I'm concerned about, and it seemed that was the very thing that stopped me from getting the role. So I was disappointed from that. So in terms of the positives, when I had my next interview for another role, it was very much you know, great stuff. It was very much a case of, yeah, we're going to talk about this for now. You know, it was a bit of an agenda. When I come to work, when I was at the previous role, it was very much I turn up at 1 minute past 9. I got told off. You need to be at your desk for 9. You know, it's your contractual hours. You need to be here at 9. So from that point on, I worked my contractual hours. I took every single 15-minute break I could. I was allowed. I took every single full 1 hour lunch. I always left the office bang on the dot. It was that case of they're my contractual hours, you know, so that's what I'm going to work. I'm not, if you're going to catch me out for the whole 1 minute past 9, then I'm not going to work through my breaks. I'm not going to work over my lunches. I'm not going to stay later if I'm finishing something off, you know. But and then moving into this more of a dev and tech industry, I think this is why dev and tech industries naturally attract a lot of neurodiverse people, is because they naturally have the environment for it. You know, in a typical dev environment, your work isn't necessarily about there and then. It's, I have this piece of work, it needs to be done in 2 weeks. It doesn't matter when it's done in that 2 weeks, as long as it's done in that time. We have deadlines. So if I'm having a bit of a bad morning and I don't start work and I'm rushing around and I don't start until 9:15, that's absolutely fine. You know, I'll catch up with my work, be it through a break or through a lunch, and that's it. So suddenly it turns that very stressful morning, I have to be on time, I have to set off at this time, make sure there's no traffic and no panic, into something that's much more relaxed. You know, I know that if I'm in a bit of a stressful morning, I can slow myself down, I can take my time to make sure I'm not starting my work day in a very high stressed, high anxiety mood. And then and another good thing, when I interviewed for my current role, another really good example is that I didn't instigate this. I didn't ask for this, but as soon as the interview started, there was an agenda. So, okay, first things, Miles, we want to ask about your employment history in terms of Salesforce. We want to know about your Salesforce experience. We're going to be talking about examples. Once done examples, you know, we're going to want to ask a few questions about how you work and everything like that. And then after that, we'll be asking questions. We want to get to know you, you know, and what you do outside of work. And then you'll have the opportunity to ask us any questions. So immediately I'd relaxed, I breathed out, I knew exactly what was going to happen, I knew when it was going to happen, I knew what to talk about, I knew what was relevant and when, and it kept everything on track. You know, the interview happened, it finished on time early because I knew what I was supposed to talk about and when. So in those sort of cases, it's the idea that the difference in employees that were very open, they're very, you know, communicated a lot. Again, I knew what I was expecting. I think as Suzanne explained earlier, you know, you can very much see those examples in what I've experienced. And I think one big thing is what I've sort of come to realize is everything that you can do to cater for neurodiverse people is, there's very much a business aspect, but then it's listening, it's observing, it's just taking that little bit of extra time. It's very human characteristics, you know, it's in fact looking at the business in a very human way, just think, okay, what would I as a person do? And and you come to realize that
you know, we're not asking, it's not a case of, oh, we're special, we need special treatment. It's the fact that no one's normal, everyone's different. So if you just naturally try to cater for everyone, then everyone's going to be catered for in that sort of human aspect. And in terms of that, what happens if we are catered for? We flourish. In terms of, to put something in quantifiable, like, again, you know, I had so many jobs in 2 years, and then I started Salesforce, and I've now been in the same job for 5 years, and I absolutely love it. In terms of quantities, in terms of moving up in seniority as well, I think I've, you know, nearly tripled my salary in 3 years, because that's what I want to do, because I was passionate for it. I wanted to grow. I wanted to go into these more accountable, more responsible roles, you know, and with the platform that I've had and the people I've had around me, I've very much been able to do that. But yeah, so thank you for listening to me. Sorry about the middle bit, you know, thankfully my IT was managed to sort it out. But yeah, again, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and we can answer them.
That's brilliant, Miles. Thanks so much. And I know yesterday when we ran the face-to-face session, we had loads of great feedback, because I think people really want to hear other people's stories, and it's just so encouraging for other people, particularly young people, you know, who can see somebody like you, who's had a little bit of a twisty road to get to where you are, but you know how well you're flourishing, and it's great, I think, for employers to understand some of the little things that we can do to make the environment, you know, it's such that you can get the best out of your employees. So we're going to move on to Bradley now. Bradley is going to talk about recruitment, and I've learned over the last 6 months since we set up Biani Recruitment that actually it's a really, really tough environment for employers, because there's a huge candidate shortage. And when there's a candidate shortage, we have to do what we can to recruit the best and to retain the best talent. And so some of these tips are geared up for neurodiverse candidates, but also just, you know, some general really, really good practice ideas. So Bradley, have we got you now?
Yes, I think you have. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks, Miles. It's been a pleasure on a personal note, actually, because I worked with Miles for a number of years previously, and it's been really nice to see Miles be able to develop his career post diagnosis. So well done to you. So for those of you that have not met me before, I'm Bradley Roger. I'm the Recruitment Director for Biani Recruitment. And I'm just going to give you a quick rundown in terms of the recruitment business and who we are, and then I'll go through the 3 things that we're going to talk through. So just to talk through the divisions that we specialise in from a recruitment perspective. The divisions are on there, and basically we cover, generally speaking, like your corporate head office function type roles, from entry level right the way through to senior level, board level appointments. And basically I have known Jay for a number of years. We founded the HR Exchange together many years ago. We went our separate ways and we've come back together. And basically Jay asked me to help her set up the recruitment business, and that was to complete the final jigsaw of the employee life cycle from the services that the employment law firm offers. So in terms of our commitment from a giving back perspective, I just want to highlight that we decided when we set up the business that we wanted to donate 10% of the profits back to charity partners. There's a number of charities that we work with across the region, and we have made a commitment to share a percentage, 10% of the profits across those charities. So if anybody on the call today is from the not-for-profit sector and would be interested in talking to us about partnership of taking some of that profit, then please get in contact with Jay directly and we'll get you on the website. So the 3 things that I'm going to talk through with you specifically today are job descriptions, adverts and applications, assessment tools, and interviews and reasonable adjustments that you should consider throughout the interview process. So we'll kick off with the job descriptions. So one of the things that we probably see a lot as hiring managers and HR professionals and recruitment professionals is that a lot of businesses have generic job description templates. So you'll go into your library, get a JD template, and it'll say on there, you know, it'll have like the generic sort of generic things on there, and then you add in your skill for that specific role. And a lot of the time, just to give it as an example, they'll say things like, candidate must have excellent communication skills. And what I would really challenge back to your managers or yourself, if you're writing the job description, is to avoid generic phrases that potentially could put an individual off who is neurodiverse from applying for that position. Because as Suzanne mentioned earlier on, some neurodiverse candidates take that line of information as literal. So they'll say you need really good communication skills to do this role as a Java developer, but actually, do you really need exceptional communication skills in that role? So I'd be looking at challenging back to your hiring managers about the wording and the phrases that are being used on the job description, and really focus on task. And that's, you know, that's what's important in this this case. And with applications, I'm referring to whether you're applying through a job board or an application, an applicant tracking system, or you are asking candidates to fill in an application form that's specifically designed by your business, you really need to make sure that the application and the process is clear and easy to understand. And don't overcomplicate the application process at the beginning, because again, it can really put candidates off from applying. And that's not just necessarily neurodiverse candidates. You know, that's across the board, really. So in terms of your careers page, for those of you that have got a careers page in your organisation, I would recommend that you check the page for any flashing images and banners, because again, that sensory overload, it can really affect candidates from a neurodiverse perspective, and it can potentially put them off from continuing to navigate through your careers page. So if you're sending candidates through to your careers page from an external job board or routing them from somewhere back to your careers page, just make sure that you've really considered that. And then also, I would recommend to encourage candidates to request reasonable adjustments. Okay, so we're going to go on to assessment tools. And what I mean by assessment tools is psychometric profiling, so personality profiling, and gamification. And I don't know if anybody wants to put in the chat whether they use any of these tools in their recruitment process. But my recommendation with this, and it's becoming quite popular, is just really think about whether psychometric tools and gamification is required, because it can potentially put neurodiverse candidates at a disadvantage. And one of the things that I would strongly recommend is, because obviously these platforms are provided by another organisation the majority of the time, I would speak to your account manager, speak to the vendors, and talk to them about, you know, what they've done as part of their technology to accommodate neurodiverse candidates. And not necessarily just neurodiverse candidates, also candidates that have got a disability, and making sure that actually, is it actually required as part of that process, or are you just doing it to tick the box? And if you make the decision that you do want to do the psychometric profiling or gamification, just make sure that you are clear with the candidate about the process. just looking in the chat there.
Yeah, I was just going to interrupt Bradley, but we have just had a question just about generic phrases, such as good communication, just saying whether or not you should use, whether they can prove transferable skills and what you'd recommend as a balance instead of just using generic phrases.
Yeah, I think the thing is this in relation to job descriptions or interview questions? I'm going to come back to that question. So let me just move on to this with the interview reasonable adjustments. Right. Okay. So with regards to interviews, so let's say, for example, you've had a number of candidates that have applied for positions, and you've gone through your shortlisting and you've selected candidates to come for an interview. At this stage, this is where you should be asking candidates if they require any reasonable adjustments to be made for their interview. And this is just generally speaking. And it allows candidates to come forward if they need any adjustments for their interview for whatever reason. But for staying on topic, let's focus on some things. If a candidate comes forward and they confirm that they've got autism or ADHD, for example, or any other neurodiverse condition. So one of the things that's important is to provide the interview questions in advance. In particular to autistic candidates, this is a real benefit for them. And I would strongly recommend that where possible, you can share the interview questions in advance with the candidate. My recommendation is to send them 48 hours before the interview. Provide clear and concise written information about the interview. And what I mean by that basically is just explain to them on the interview confirmation about what is going to happen. So like Miles said earlier on, it really helps if there's an agenda. So for example, if you know it's a 60-minute interview, you've got a 30-minute slot to do a Q&A on career history and CV, and a 30-minute slot to talk through specific questions relating to the technical competencies within that role, then tell the candidate that. It really puts candidates at ease. And those candidates as well that do struggle with anxiety, for example, they like to know what to expect in advance. Also providing directions to the office in a map. I mean, this is a given really, but it's just, don't assume that everyone just knows how to Google and find directions. Sometimes you need to just take into consideration, these candidates would need that information in advance. Make sure you include the names of the people that are on the interview panel. And ideally, if you can, if you've decided who's taking what role in the interview. So let's say, for example, if Jay and I were interviewing a candidate and I was the note taker and Jay was the lead interviewer, then tell the candidate that, put it on the interview confirmation. And a timetable of events during the interview. So like I said before, if it's 30 minutes and 30 minutes, just tell them that it's going to be a 60-minute interview so they know what to expect. In terms of the space that you're going to interview in and candidates are going to wait in, like Miles said earlier on, you need to be free from distraction. And I would strongly recommend that you think of a quiet, calm space for candidates to wait whilst they're being interviewed. So if you've got a busy reception where it's an open plan office and you've got lots of people coming in and out, it can really affect candidates. And also think about your interviewing room as well. If your interview room is connected to the breakout room for lunchtime and you're interviewing 12 till 1, the chances are that it's going to be pretty noisy in there. So, like Miles said earlier on as well, avoid general questions. Things like, tell me about yourself. And the reason for that, like Miles mentioned earlier on, and the reason why he was rejected for that interview is that they will tell you about themselves for an hour. You know, they'll talk a lot in the interview. And so you need to try and be specific to the candidate's real and past experiences. So very similar to competency-based interviews, you know, I'd be asking them just really straightforward questions about, you know, about their career history, and things like, you know, in your last role, can you tell me when? That, you know, those types of experience-based questions. Avoid using hypothetical and abstract questions. So, for example, you know, a lot of the time some managers will say, also, if, you know, how do you think you'll cope if there were lots of interruptions in your role? They're going to be sat thinking, right, what would I do if I got interrupted? And it'll take them a while to answer the question, but it's not specific enough. So what I would probably do with that example is say, if you think back to your last role, can you tell us how you coped when somebody interrupted you at your desk? So you're asking them to think back and give you an example of something in the past. And talking too much. So if a candidate is talking too much and they're giving you it's information overload, please help them out. You know, don't let them go on and on and on. You need to think of a polite way to interrupt the candidate. And I'd say something like, you know, thank you, you've given us enough information about that question now, and I'd like to ask you a different question. Or if they're not answering the question, you need to pull them back and say, okay, let's just stop there, and I'm going to ask the question in a different way, so you can then start and gather your information, and try and prompt the candidate to extract the relevant information. Now, I know this potentially goes against some recruitment training that you've probably had, where you shouldn't help candidates along to answer the question, but there has to be some adjustment made to help these candidates to be able to extract the relevant information. And don't ask multiple questions at the same time. And it happens a lot in interviews. You know, managers will say the last 3 questions on the bounce, and the candidate just can't process the volume of information that they're being asked. You ask one question at a time, and then if you need to probe further, you then continue down the line. Provide adequate breaks if needed. Now, this is going to be really rare, but let's say, for example, if you are hosting an open day for recruitment and you've got lots of people coming in and you've got a different agenda for the day, where you might be doing meet and greets, a show around the office, demos of some of the equipment or the services that you provide, and then a face-to-face interview, just make sure that people get adequate breaks when needed before you start pulling people into the interview rooms. And also, a lot of neurodiverse candidates will do a lot of research, right? If they're passionate about coming in for an interview with your organisation, they will have research, they'll have lots of information and notes, and they will have really thought about the interview. And just allow candidates to refer to any notes that they've made, because it will help them perform better in the interview. And finally, as an alternative to an interview, if some of you are able to do this, then why not offer candidates a work trial instead? You could get candidates to come in for half a day and talk them through what the role involves, and get them doing some basic parts of the role, give them very specific instructions, and then, you know, see how they perform within that role. And it's just a different or additional way to see how somebody performs in their role. And that is all I've got on my section. Do you want me to answer any questions?
There was one question which I think we went through earlier, and Suzanne's kindly answered it as well. So it's just whether you want to add anything onto what Suzanne's said, Bradley. And it was just in terms of generic phrases such as good communication. I appreciate the view in regards to an open statement. However, they can prove useful for transferable skills. What would you recommend as a balance? And that question was asked by Stephen.
Okay. Yeah, so I think with regards to generic phrases, sometimes they do need to be in there, because I understand that sometimes generic phrases might form part of like your organization's values or something like that. But I think that what you can potentially do with the job descriptions is think of different ways of phrasing it so that it potentially doesn't put a candidate off who is neurodiverse from applying. But remember, a job description and an advert is different. So a lot of companies will use the JD to create their advert, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to transfer all the information from the JD into the advert. But if it is critical in the advert and the job, then you obviously need to include it. But you can get, I can't remember the name of the technology, but there is technology and there are businesses out there that can review things like job descriptions that help you remove bias from your job descriptions. I hope that's answered your question.
I'm just wondering if I can add a little bit to that as well, in terms of, you know, personally, if I were to read it. Because I know sometimes generically saying, you know, excellent communication skills is, like I say, it's quite broad. And going into the specifics a bit more in terms of the balance, you know, in terms of having something generic to attract someone can be reviewed in itself and be enough. But then sometimes it's a case of looking at the specific role, because excellent communication skills, does it mean verbal? Does it mean written? I think one good example I can think of is like working at a restaurant. Now, everyone in a restaurant who works within a restaurant needs excellent communication skills, but the servers and the waiters and waitresses need excellent communication skills with talking to customers and then going back and speaking to the chefs. The chefs need excellent communication skills, not necessarily to the customers and that front of house facing, but also, you know, the operational side of things, you know, taking those orders from the servers and then, you know, being able to communicate, this one's ready, that one's ready, that'll be 5 minutes. And then anyone who's maybe on the bar won't be speaking to many people at all. So it's a case of they do need excellent communication skills, or to, you know, to be able to more reading, they'll see the orders come through the tills and the systems, need to be able to look at that. But then they don't necessarily need to have those communication skills to speak to customers or to necessarily to speak to a lot of other of the members of the team at all times. Otherwise, I think in my personal role, there's a lot of workshops that I run. It's a case of, I know I'm personally much more comfortable speaking when there's an agenda, but if it's a bit more of a sit down open conversation, I can struggle to get things going. You know, I have excellent communication skills, but sometimes I just need help getting going. So sometimes I have a little bit of a chaperone. So I think it's a case of, is there anything within the role that can be, particularly for the job description, be a bit more specific as well? Is it a case of, is it a written skills? We need excellent communication skills verbally or written. Someone who might not be able to hold a conversation together very well or be very confident that might be able to put together like absolutely stellar emails and vice versa. So hopefully that adds a bit more to that question.
Yeah, great, thanks Miles, and thanks for that, Bradley. I think one of the things that you know, we're doing differently with our recruitment service is some of those things. So helping, you know, not just find a candidate, but we'll help you with putting together interview questions and thinking about how you're going to assess these candidates, so that, you know, you get the best, they get the best experience and you find the best candidates. But yeah, all of that is really useful, and there's a lot you can draw out when you get to interview stage, certainly. Right, so we're going to move on to our last session. So we've got Lindsay, who's going to look at some really essential things that that you need to know about, which is, you know, what happens if things go wrong. and you get some of this wrong. What we're seeing, obviously, as an employment law firm, we're seeing a real take-up in employment tribunal claims against businesses. People seem to be quite litigious at the moment. So I think it's really important to get this right. And I'll pass you on to Lindsay now.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, but some tough acts to follow there. I thought, Suzanne, Miles, Bradley, absolutely amazing. And I think we've heard some really good stuff today. I hope there's lots that you can take away. My bit always feels a bit doom and gloom. I'm the one that kind of looks at, well, yeah, what happens if we do get it wrong? What kind of claims can we be looking at? And in this instance, really the key claim that we are most concerned about here is discrimination. So the majority, if not all, of the conditions that we've discussed today have the potential to be recognised disabilities under the Equality Act. So we're not going to debate whether each one in turn would be classed as one. I think from an employer's perspective, you just need to be aware that if someone is flagging up issues to you that they are struggling in any way, shape or form, disability has to be at the forefront of your mind, because people who do have a recognised disability they have enhanced rights and protection under the Equality Act, and there's different ways in which they are protected. So here I've listed the different types of discrimination under the disability banner. You've got direct discrimination. Doesn't happen that often, because very rarely will you see, for instance, it will take recruitment as an example, someone saying, well, I'm not going to employ you because you are disabled. I'm not going to employ you because you've got ADHD. It's never that explicit. That might be the reason and the undertone to it, but it's very rare. Someone will say directly to someone else, or put it in an email, I'm not doing this because of your disability. The most common ones that we see in relation to disability is, first of all, indirect discrimination. And this can arise from employers thinking that actually I'm doing the right thing. I've put in place, for instance, a rule. It applies to everyone equally. I'm not, I'm not singling anyone out. And from their perspective, they're being fair. And they think that whatever rule they're putting in place, whether that be everyone must be here bang at 9 o'clock every day without fail, 1 minute late will be disciplinary. It could be that people are, for instance, required to attend certain events. And as I said, you might think, yeah, but it applies to everyone. That's okay. Well, no, actually, it might not be okay, because there'll be certain people in your workforce who may have conditions such as they may be neurodiverse, but they may also have other disabilities as well, which means that that rule that you have fairly implemented for everyone actually impacts them disproportionately, and they can't comply with it, or they struggle to comply with it, or it puts them just at a disadvantage. So indirect discrimination is quite a common one that we see, and we really encourage employees to raise grievances and to raise issues with managers when rules are put in place that do impact them. But as we found out today, there's certain types of people may not speak up. So as an employer, you need to be carefully considering the rules that you put in place, but also being aware of your workforce and the individuals within your workforce, because they may not speak up. They may feel uncomfortable to do so, but you could be putting them at a disadvantage. And then the other key one, I think, I'm sure most people are aware of things like harassment. So that is generally we find that that's behaviour that it can be a pattern of behaviour that impacts someone negatively. Victimisation is putting people through processes or treating them differently because they have raised an issue. Discrimination arising from disability is a bit more, again, it's a bit more of a common one, and we'll look at a case that deals with that shortly. But the biggie for me is failure to make reasonable adjustments. And this applies to anyone that has a disability that falls within the Equality Act. You have a legal obligation to make reasonable adjustments. So firstly, when do we have to make them? When we know someone is disabled, whether that is we have explicit knowledge or it is obvious to us that they're disabled. We encourage you to get to know your staff and try to encourage people to be open and honest about their disabilities and what they need from you. You cannot force someone to tell you that they are disabled. You can't put pressure on people or make them feel uncomfortable trying to extract the information. What you need to do is really concentrate on creating an open environment where people will be happy to come forward to you and say, actually, I've got this, or I'm struggling with that, or this is affecting me at the moment. We need to make reasonable adjustments when we've got employees or job applicants who ask for adjustments. Obviously, that's the ideal. We want people to come forward to us and say, this is what I would like to happen. So to take a key example that Miles gave us, the adjustment that he wanted when he was placed in that desk right next to the door was he just wanted to be moved to the other side. So he wasn't being distracted and he could concentrate on his work, but also he could just manage his day better. And that small change made a big difference to his ability to work. So yeah, if someone comes to you and asks, just think it through. Don't automatically dismiss it. Again, your dismissal might be because, well, no one else is getting special treatment. This is not about special treatment. And as an employee, you've got a responsibility to make sure that you are not looking at reasonable adjustments as special treatment, because people won't want to come forward then, and you're going to start alienating sections of your workforce. An employee with disabilities having difficulty with any part of their job. So that could arise from, you think, oh, someone's underperforming, they're not turning up on time. Rather than just jump straight to, oh, we need to go down performance management, we need to dismiss, we need to do this. Take time to talk to them and find out, well, why are they struggling? And what can you do to either improve that situation or allow that employee to manage things differently. And again, sickness records, delay in returning to work linked to disabilities, these are all key triggers where you should be having these discussions about reasonable adjustments with your members of staff. So how do we make them? So first of all, we need to identify what that adjustment is and who requires that. And as I said, the easiest way to do that is having an open and honest dialogue with your workforce so that they feel comfortable coming to you and saying yes. One-to-ones, appraisals, regular reviews will all help identify issues before they turn into something that becomes unmanageable, or before you get to a point where you make a rash decision that could land you in hot water. Consult with the individual who it affects. So again, I'm going to repeat what Miles said. It was all about communication for him. He just wanted someone to talk to him and ask him, well, what do you want? How do you feel about that? What would make things easier for you? So don't disregard that individual, and also don't make assumptions about their disability. Someone who, or one person that has ADHD will be completely different to another person that has ADHD. If you've made adjustments for one person that has that condition, you can't just automatically apply those adjustments to another person that has it, thinking, well, I've sorted, I've got that ticked off now, that's fine. So make sure that you're treating everyone as separately, and you're not just categorizing. And also do a bit of research as well. Yeah, there's so much information out there. Like I said, we've heard from Suzanne today from Autism Plus. They've got a wealth of information available. They're happy to speak to you. You've got access to work, again, which is, it's a completely unused resource that the government has put in place. So get some help, do your research. As I said, don't just make assumptions. And as if needed, get someone in, and they can help you make those decisions. Document your decision process. I always say that create a paper trail so that we can see exactly what you've done when you did it. All discussions and talks are great, but if there is no record that conversation ever happened in a tribunal, it becomes one word against another. It can be very difficult to prove. Once you've decided on your adjustments for that individual and both parties are happy, make sure that the key people around that person know. So, for instance, if you're in a HR role and you suggest reasonable adjustments, but you haven't involved the manager is going to need to know. But also, I think a key one here is talking with the employee concerned to understand how far, or are they happy with you discussing matters with their immediate workforce. So you want other employees to understand why you are making the adjustments without making that individual employee with the disability feel singled out, feel embarrassed. So I think between you, you need to you need to come up with a plan of, right, who would you like to know about this? How would you like us to communicate it? And then also think about some wider training, not just focused on this individual, but general, because everything I'm talking about here does not just apply to neurodiverse employees. I'm talking about disabilities across the board. So get some training in place, get your equality diversity training up to date. And if any of you were on my last employment law update, you'll have seen that out of date training is useless. It's not going to protect you in a tribunal. It's got to be relevant. And you've got to keep reminding all staff, not just your managers, what is expected of them, and then review it. Again, don't just put those adjustments in place and think, oh, I've done it now, sorted. Yes, yeah, you've made those adjustments, but what happens if they're not working? What happens if they don't have the desired effect? Sometimes adjustments can be trial and error, and it requires honest communication between all parties. So ideas then, what kind of adjustments can we be making? And the majority of these adjustments that I found are low-cost adjustments. For instance, work schedules, allowing extra breaks, being flexible with start and finish times, looking at flexible working. I can imagine the majority you are already considering flexible working now post-COVID, because actually it works for a lot of businesses. So, but again, don't assume that someone who, for instance, has autism will want to work on their own. They may actually feel isolated at home. However, someone else with autism may love working at home and think, yes, this is for me. So yeah, you can't make the same assumptions again for a person who has the same disability. Adjustments to the role. So can you look at workloads? Can you look at tasks? Prioritizing and allowing flexibility. Can we adjust the environment? So like I said, for Miles, that was a big thing for him in terms of allowing him to get onto his work, but for an employer, that's actually not a huge ask. Room dividers, moving desks, providing desks with lamps, offering home working, those types of things can all be considered. And again, there's so much equipment out there that we can use at relatively low cost. So yeah, the speech to text software can help someone that has difficulties typing or writing at speed. Adjusting colours on screens can just be a really big thing. And all you can get literally a filter that goes over your screen, and that can make the world of difference to someone. Again, another good option when it comes to looking at disability adjustments for disabilities is making sure you get things like occupational health reports, because again, that individual talking to someone external to the company, particularly if you go to someone that is specialist in that area, they may be able to come up with some ideas that neither you or the employee would know about as options. So yeah, get some other people involved. And then yeah, I'll end on a little bit of doom and gloom. Even the big guns in the world don't always get this right. So this is the case of Kamulchu Starbucks, and Starbucks got it wrong. In this case, the claimant had worked for them for a number of years. She'd worked her way up to supervisor. However, she had dyslexia, and she was very honest about this and open with her employer about her dyslexia. And she had actually tried on a number of occasions to tell them, well, my dyslexia affects me in this way. I struggle with writing, I struggle with telling the time, and I struggle where to put decimal points. She'd been very specific about that. However, it came to light that one of her duties was to take fridge temperatures, and it came to light that she had been entering incorrect data into the logbooks and the roster book. And Starbucks, instead of doing a full investigation into this, they just saw it and they just wrote fraud. So she's being fraudulent. That's a disciplinary offence. This needs to go to disciplinary. And for this lady, actually, the biggest part of this claim, she still worked for Starbucks after. She didn't leave. She loved her job. But the biggest thing for this was that she had been caught, she'd been told that she was fraudulent. And the statement that she made after this case came out was, I am not a fraud. I didn't do this on purpose. I'd been honest about my disability, and they should have done more for me. So in this case, the tribunal found that Starbucks had failed to make reasonable adjustments. The judge was quite clear that it wouldn't have been a big effort for Starbucks to have either someone double check entries or someone just take over that very small part of her job, or just write, she does the check, someone else writes it in. It wouldn't have been a big issue. The judge also found, and was very surprised with that, the managers had a complete lack of awareness about not only the claimant's disability, her dyslexia, and how it affected her, despite her being very open and honest about it, but also the managers' lack of awareness of Starbucks' own policies. So, Starbucks policy suite is all singing or dancing. They've got equality and diversity, they've got disability policies, they've got things on reasonable adjustments. However, the managers were completely unaware of it. What is the point in having these, this amazing handbook and suite of policies if your staff are not trained up in them and aren't aware of them? And again, this was the example of the victimisation, where because she received that disciplinary, it was found that they had disciplined her basically because of something arising from her disability. So we tick that box, but also, that actual warning that she received was deemed as victimisation as well. This could have all been avoided had Starbucks done some proper investigations, had they had some conversations with her before just jumping straight to that end result. So a message to us all that even those with the most money and the best, HR departments, and we can all get it wrong. So I'm kind of moving on then for what we can do for you. On the back of this, first of all, I do need to mention that Suzanne and her organisation offer so much support. And we do strongly recommend you getting in touch with Suzanne if you have any concerns about your workplace where you think Suzanne could help. But what we're offering is more looking at this from a legal perspective. So we'll look at your recruitment process, we'll do a free review of your contracts, and just to make sure that you are up to date, and there's nothing in there that are red flags. It's only a cursory glance just so that you've got a little bit of peace of mind that, actually, we're okay. And it may be that actually we can suggest some options for you. So if you do want to take us up on that review, please get in touch. We've got hello@bjarneylaw.co.uk email, or just give us a call on the office number and we'll be happy to help. So that brings us to the end of our session, and I hope you've all really enjoyed it. We do have some upcoming events now. First of all, we've got our Bjarney Social. I appreciate not all of you guys are going to be local to Sheffield, but if you are and you are around on Wednesday the 15th of December, we would love to meet you. So we're hosting our Bjarney Social. It's a bit like our little Christmas party, really, where it's just an informal get together. As I said, it's nice to be able to speak with our clients and our friends in a more informal setting. So if you want to come along, please book onto that. Email alice@bjarneylaw.co.uk there. Let us know that you are coming. As I said, we'd be over the moon to see you. And then HR Exchange, we've got 2 more left in this session, in this season, and shortly we will be starting to plan our next season because it's been amazing to get these back up and running again after COVID. Our next one is recruitment and reward packages. I believe Bradley is coming back and doing another talk for us on that, which we're very excited about. We offer the sessions in person and on Zoom, and we're going to continue to do that. So we're aware a lot of you, it does suit you coming along to the Zoom as opposed to the in-face session. But if you do want to come along and see us face-to-face, we have it at the Advanced Manufacturing Park, which is just on the outskirts of Sheffield, off the Parkway. And then our final one in this season is the Safe Exit Settlement Agreements and Exit Processes. One of my favourite things. I can talk about them forever, but I will keep it quite concise for you, and you'll come away with some amazing and really good advice on how to handle your exits and settlement agreements. So thank you for attending today's session. I'll pass over to Jay, who I'm sure wants to say just a quick thank you to everyone as well.
Oh, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, that's really useful. So thank you to everybody, to Bradley, Lindsay, Miles, and Suzanne and Ellie for checking on the questions. Please do get in touch with Suzanne if you can offer any support to Autism Plus, because I know that they're inundated with requests to, you know, to come and talk to people. But I think it would be great if we can get involved with their organisation and help give anything back, whether that's donations or voluntary time. I know that you've got some initiatives where you have interview skills, where you get your service users to test out interview skills. I know a couple of my team have said that they're happy to get involved in that. So that's great. So let's upskill the nation. Let's try and create a really great level playing field for people, and let's get the best candidates and keep the best candidates for our businesses. So keep in touch with us. All the best to everyone, and please try and come to our face-to-face sessions, because for me personally, being old-fashioned, I really like actually being in a room with people. So keep an eye out for all our sessions, and come along and join us if you can. All right, all the best for Christmas. Have a great time, and let's hope for a better 2022. Bye bye then.
Listen, if anyone does just want to stick around and ask anything, we will be here just for a few more minutes. If there's anyone wants to unmute and ask us. Yeah, and we'll send out some feedback questionnaire, and on there, if you want a copy of the slides or you want to be put in touch with anyone, we just want to take up the free review of your processes and contracts and policies, whatever, let us know on there, and we'll get in touch with you. Okay, guys. I think everyone's disappearing off.
Joe's just put a comment in there about access to work and contributions towards costs. Support worker and training is 100% funded, so you don't have to contribute anything towards what we provide. So the £1,000 contribution you would have to make is for equipment, so physical equipment or software, but support worker is 100% funded. So just to add to that, it's a complicated system, access to work.
It is, which it's such an, like you said, it's people aren't aware of it, and I don't understand why they're trying to keep it hidden, especially when it's so important and it can really change things for people.
But they do. Well, I mean, like Joe's just put there in terms of the training sessions and stuff that they put on there, they when the access to it ring you, they do talk to the employer straight off about the contribution and the size of the business and the fact that you'll have to contribute towards and you have to sign up to it. But it's not all funded. It's not all contribution based. Like I said, the support worker element and training is 100% funded. So just bear that in mind when you're talking to access to work.
Yeah, great. So I think Jamina, if you're still on, I'm not sure how you found out about the session, but I think you're in Bataan or somewhere. So great to see people from far and away joining us, and you're very welcome to come again.
Yeah, she did put a thank you. She's now gone. So yeah, she found the session really useful, which is good. Nice to know. Right, and I think if that is everything, yeah, we can close the session unless there's anything else anyone wants to add.
No, I think all the questions have been covered from there.
Who's still on?
Can you remove people?
Yeah. Right then, I think it's just us guys.
And then they were 8.
And then just press stop recording, Linz.
Oh yeah.
Before.